Greetings. My name is Hillary Miller. I am a park guide at Women's Rights National Historical Park in Seneca Falls, New York. I am pleased to be joined by Dr. Melinda Grube, who is an adjunct lecturer of history, and she has been portraying Elizabeth Cady Stanton for educational programs, lectures, and events in Seneca Falls and throughout New York State for more than a decade. Melinda, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. We are here to talk about the ins and outs of portraying Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Quite a historical character, very complicated in many ways. And yeah, we just want to pick your brain a little bit about what that experience is like. So we'll start out with just talking a little bit about what is your relationship with Elizabeth Cady Stanton? How did you get into portraying her?
Well, at first I thought it was mostly geographical proximity. I grew up near Seneca Falls, and my family, my ancestry includes relatives who were abolitionists in Seneca Falls at the time of Stanton's residence, and they knew her. My father had done research on her, on that time period rather, and I had done research on her as every little girl in the area does, I visited the park as a child, so it seemed like a natural connection, but at first I didn't feel a really strong affinity. It was something that I was asked to do, and then once I began doing it, I found that she was endlessly fascinating for me, and it was like a depth that I kept falling into. It started with convenience, and it became something much more.
Oh, that's so interesting, and you have to love the personal connection there too. That's wonderful. So you are also a scholar, and how does Stanton relate to your research as a scholar? You mentioned about being, intrigued by her in these different ways. Does that fit in with your research?
My research focuses on women, religion, especially unorthodox religious perspectives, free thought, and the ways that women navigate the world of religion and politics and reform. Stanton is a natural fit for me there because she is, from the very beginning of her life, challenging orthodox religion, orthodox politics, orthodox society. So the other part of my research is in central and western New York. This is such a fascinating region. The burned over district, the politics, the abolition, there's so much of interest here in New York State. Stanton is such a major player, and there was no way to do research on the Erie Canal region, on the burned over district, without talking about Stanton.
Oh, absolutely. A lot happens here, and it's really fascinating to see how all of these movements come together, and figureheads like Stanton find themselves out in Seneca Falls in this burned over district. So what do you like about Stanton? Is there a best part about portraying her?
There is a great deal I like about Stanton. There's a great deal I don't like about Stanton, but if I'm focusing just on the parts I like, Stanton is a woman who is comfortable in her body. And she's taught me to be more comfortable in mine. Stanton acknowledges her size. She doesn't just acknowledge it, she glories in it. She believed her head was larger than most people's heads. And she believed that that meant that she had a larger than average brain. And of course we know that that's not really good science, but she used her body to justify herself, and she didn't apologize for it. And that has been a discipline that she has put on me. Wearing her clothes, putting on those dresses, and feeling the weight of the dresses could be something that could be demoralizing, but actually it feels liberating for me because Stanton occupied her own space without apology. And she's taught me to do the same. I'm not as good at it as she was, but I do think that's a really important thing she had to say to women. I also like how jolly she was. She took pride in her feminine, maternal, grandmotherly image. A lot of that was concocted. It was political, but there's something about her that's, I can always feel her in my head winking at me as people ask questions. She didn't take herself very seriously, but she took her cause seriously. And having that humor has been very helpful for me. I don't have a character who is very prim and proper. She's always grinning at the world, and that I love.
Oh, that's fantastic. So you mentioned that there were some things you don't like about her. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, Stanton grew up in a slaveholding family. She was from the wealthiest family in Johnstown. Her father was a judge, a very powerful man. Her mother was from one of the great aristocratic families of New York State. She grew up with a great deal of privilege. And we're talking privilege of the wealthiest families in the United States in the early 19th century. She challenged that privilege her entire life, but she never escaped it. And so often, while we talk frequently about her racism, we ignore that at the base of that racism is a more general ism of classism that supports the racist attitudes that we often see, particularly in the years following the Civil War. So for me, it's the grappling with how do I portray a character who believes in something that I find reprehensible, and is inconsistent in it. So she moves from being very noble and very supportive of universal rights to these petty racist phrases that drop so casually into her most beautiful speeches, marring the beauty of the speech. And then, and in the end, I think it all comes from this sense of herself as being inherently better than others. And the part of it, I think, that is valuable to me, despite the fact that it's very uncomfortable, is that I can often identify her classist attitudes, her elitism, in my own unconscious thoughts about, my access to education, for instance, my access to the very research I do to portray her is a product of my own privilege. And so in critiquing her as I'm playing her, I often find, to my shame, that I also harbor some of these beliefs in my own inherent superiority, and I have to check it over and over. And it makes me ashamed of myself. When someone accuses her of being an elitist, I wish that everyone could feel what it's like to stand in her shoes and take that accusation in, let it sit there for a while, uncomfortably. It's possible that many of us feel the same way about ourselves as she did. And I think one of the great values of studying someone like her is that she's not obviously a wicked person. She has so many noble qualities, and yet they coexist with these ugly qualities, kind of like all of humanity, and something that we need to keep reminding ourselves as individuals to face, even though it hurts.
That's really interesting. And I mean, it's a good example of seeing those intersections of race and class and gender all coming together with Stanton. And I think it's really profound that you use Stanton as a way to examine your own privilege, here in the 21st century, and using that as a tool. And yeah, it's, do you think that that comes across during your programs, that this is complicated, that she is complicated? Do you have people typically at your programs pushing back with that criticism of Stanton?
Not always. And I wanted to be a part and try to make it a part of the programs I do. It just feels like it is really important. And there are times when I'm better at it than others. The thing about her is the tensions between that which she does very well and beautifully and that which she does so disappointingly. It would be easier if she could be one thing or the other, but she's such a mixed bag. Any given Stanton speech, you can find things that make you proud to be human, and then you can find other things that make you ashamed. Mm-hmm. That seems to me to be the critical piece, that complexity. I hope I'm able to portray her as a complex character. I want her to be someone that we love and are disappointed in. I want us to think that she's capable of more and that she could have grown more. Because if we identify with that, someone who is noble and good and disappointing, then maybe we can forgive ourselves and push ourselves harder. We have to push ourselves harder. And Stanton as someone who is irredeemable, I don't think is very valuable to us. Stanton who is heroic is not very valuable to us. They're all dead, those people in the past. You know, they're gone. It's all right for us to critique them. Their feelings are not going to be hurt. So we can use them as tools for evaluating ourselves, mirrors into which we can look. And the only way we can do that is if we grapple with the wide range of emotions that they inspire in us. They were just people. And we are in peril if we put them on a pedestal.
Well, those are wonderful insights. Stanton, we talked about criticism of her today in the 21st century. Did she receive any criticism during her time?
Almost nothing but. I think that she is an interesting person, a rare breed in women who did not mind too much. In fact, she welcomed it. I don't think it meant that her feelings were never hurt. In fact, they were frequently hurt. But she would say what she felt. She didn't delay saying what she felt. She thought that the best time to bring a subject up was the moment she thought of it. This would upset Susan B. Anthony, who wished that she would maybe pause a little bit before she launched a new campaign. Stanton was first criticized, of course, because she introduced the idea of suffrage. It didn't seem like the right idea at the time. And we can talk about why. It wasn't because the other women didn't think women were good enough for the vote. They had other moral concerns about voting. But that was the first. She introduced dress reform. She and her cousin, and Amelia Bloomer, introduced dress reform. And she received a great deal of criticism from that. Then she introduced the idea of divorce reform. And she caught all kinds of hell on that account. So she continued to do this. At the end of her life, she challenged Christianity. She challenged the Bible. She challenged organized religion in general. And I think probably that earned her the most contempt from Americans. And actually, the fear was that she would bring the women's movement down with her. And so women in the movement distanced themselves. And I think this may have been the most painful part for her. She expected ordinary people to be very cautious about her causes. But when members of her movement turned on her, I think that sometimes took her by surprise. I don't know why, because it happened again and again throughout her life.
So interesting. So it really goes to show how complex she was, even for people during her time period. let alone those of us now looking back and examining her legacy and what she means. And you have done a really fantastic job of talking about the way that we can use Stanton as a mirror to examine ourselves and our privileges. Is there anything else you want to add about how we can learn from Stanton, her complexities, the good and bad, today?
I've been thinking a great deal about this, and I think it would depend on the day you asked me this question. There is the use of any historical figure as a mirror, as we discussed. There's also this idea that ideas themselves maybe transcend all of us, that it's possible for someone to be inhabited by a good idea, by a noble pursuit, by wisdom and virtue, and then to fall from grace, pick themselves up and come back to virtue. I see it not just with Stanton, I see it with Frederick Douglass, with Susan B. Anthony, even with the sainted Lucretia Mott, who it turns out was not a saint. This idea of ideas, that ideas are something that we can play with, that we can live in, that can inhabit us. I like to think about history as a way of exploring that there is something delicious and wonderful about our ideas, that it's safe for us to talk about them. It's safe for us to debate them. In fact, that's how we grow in ideas, is through debate, through discussion. The ability to recognize that we might be wrong. And if someone as intelligent, as brilliant, and she was one of, if not the key theoretician of what we now call feminist theory in 19th century America. If she could get it wrong as often as she did, then maybe I need to be humble in my time. That's very important for me as a researcher. It's very important for me as a mother. It's very important for me as a human being. And there is so much good that I get from her and watching her play with these great ideas, and watching her fall from grace as often as she does. I don't think I'll ever get tired of her, and I don't think she'll ever let me go. It no longer feels much like a choice. It feels as if she and I are family, and you know how your family drives you crazy. She drives me nuts. I argue with her all the time. And I still love her. She is endlessly complex, fascinating, brilliant, disappointing, and there she is, a human being.
And that's Elizabeth Cady Stanton right there. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing your insights for us. It's so important for us to examine the ways that we portray these types of characters, and really what you're taking on as you become Stanton for these programs. So this has been really fascinating, an incredible behind the scenes look at what it's like to portray a complex character like her. Thank you so much, Dr. Grube, for joining us today and talking about this. We look forward to seeing your journey with Stanton continue, and see if you continue those arguments with her along the way, and that conversation with this historical character. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. It was my pleasure.